Okay, thank you. Right, so this is our agenda. Brian Trammell and Robin Marks were gonna scribe for us. And let me pull up this Etherpad to see if anything has happened. No.
There he is. Excellent.
Hello. Apologies. Yes, my DHCP decided to go down. No one had an IP.
All right. So Brian is here, and Robin is not yet. So I guess Brian, you can start minuting, and we're using the Kodi MD. How do you pronounce this thing? The new Etherpad. 4 minutes this time it seems to have worked for people. Brian, can you indicate whether you're starting to minute?
And please put a link into the various Jabber bits.
Okay, finding it. I'll put the link in the Jabber.
Oh.
And if people want to help Brian out, by fixing names or spelling or whatever, please go ahead.
Yes, please.
Brian's also going to present, so Robin was going to minute for him at that time. If Robin isn't here, if somebody else could do that, that would be great. Integration in MeetEcho means no link. I don't quite understand what that means.
I was able to click it.
Anyway,
I haven't figured out how to write. Ah, here we go. Cool.
You got it?
Yeah. Well, there may be some post editing that needs to happen here, but the text will make it into the thing.
Okay, that's all we care about. And if there are problems, let us know so that we stop the press and let you figure out what's not working. Okay, so I guess with that we can start. So welcome to the quick working group meeting at IETF 108. Everybody's at home, or at least not in one place. We haven't met in a while. We canceled 107, and we haven't had any interims because we were busy chugging through the issues. But since it looks like we're going to be in this virtual form for a little while longer, and we felt it was important now that the working group last call on the base drafts has concluded to sort of have a meeting to figure out where we are and where we're going to go from here. You'll see our agenda. It's same as always. If you're here, you know how to join MeetEcho. We just talked about the minutes. There's also the meeting chat in MeetEcho, which is the same as the Jabber, and it's the same as the QuickDev Slack Jabber channel. So you can use all three to talk to each other. Isn't the internet great? There was a hackathon last week, all week long. Quick was one of the topics. We also had a virtual interop day before that, and interop is going on pretty constantly anyway. So I'm going to say a little bit about that. Blue sheets, I think, are being automatically generated, if I remember correctly. So we don't have to do that. We've selected our scribes. You are familiar with the node well. In case you're not, I'm going to click on the link and see if it comes up, right? You are. So basically, if you're participating in the IETF, and participating means, speaking or sending email or interacting on GitHub, you are obliged to follow a set of rules. And that set of rules includes IPR-related things, but also the code of conduct. So please adhere to that when you're participating. Agenda bashing, let me quickly run through what we have planned, and then we can see if we want to bash it. The usual quick hackathon interop report. We are then thinking that we're going to probably use quite a bunch of our time for discussing various issues, so that it will turn over to the editors. One of those issues has slides, as far as I know. The other ones, I think we're just going to basically do the discussion based on GitHub. And then we're going to talk about other adopted working group items and their status and any sort of issues with those, which would be quick load balancers and the ops drafts, manageability and applicability drafts. We're going to try a little bit on planning. That should be pretty short. And then we have quite a few requests in the as time permits bucket. Those are sort of work items or topics that are related to the working group, but are not adopted. And we roughly bucketed them based on how much engagement we saw on the list and on GitHub. So this is roughly the order in which we think we're going to get to them, but we'll see how much time we have, and if something can, get by with less time, maybe we bump them up or not. Let's see. Any agenda bashing that people want to do? I guess not. Great. That brings us to the issue discussion. And if the editors want to tell me in which order they want to go, I can share stuff. Do we want to go with the one issue that we have slides on first?
Mike Bishop, yeah, that would be fine.
Okay, and that would be the
migration 3765.
Thank you. I wonder, I'm just confused because there's two. Anyway, I guess the concept of a PR is. Oh God, no, this is not what I wanted to click. I guess I'm going to share another application now because you probably want to see this one. Oh, it actually works like this probably, huh?
Yeah, that'll be okay.
Okay, go ahead.
So yeah, basically just to recap, we had an issue previously about disabling active migration. That's been in for a while. And there are a couple categories of reasons why you might want to do that. One is purely technical, that you can't receive incoming packets or you can't guarantee the routing of incoming packets that have a different source for a couple different reasons that are on the slide, but we're not going to go into unless people need to. You might also be doing it for performance reasons. If you have lots of servers all over the world, somebody migrates to a different network, getting the old server on your new network is unlikely to be helpful. It's not going to perform as well when there's likely a node closer to you. And then also there are contract issues where you have all these hyperlocal servers, and part of the way you got those is by contracting with the ISP. We're going to put a server in your network to serve your customers. That's all it's there for. So next slide, which is actually already on screen, sure. We also have this feature of server preferred address, which you can use to improve scaling on your load balancer by only doing handshakes through it and then offloading the rest of the traffic to an address that goes directly to the node that you're talking to. That also helps you deal with any cast if you do have a migration. And it also has this little side effect that we added where a client can do a handshake on one address family and switch to a different one. So thinking about the reasons for disabling, if you look at the next slide, the performance one isn't necessarily a reason to disable because the client might want to make that choice. If they're, I'm seeing a strange look, but the client might want to make that choice.
Make the window look nicer, and I'm hoping this is nicer now.
Okay. If you're at the beginning of a download, you might want to kill that old connection and switch to a new path that is going to hopefully give you better performance from your new network attachment. If the download's not resumable, you're almost at the end, you might want to just finish it off. Going on to the fourth slide. Oh, I'm missing a slide in here. Okay, So going back to the technical issues bucket, we had an issue earlier. We had an issue fairly recently, in I think the last consensus call, where we concluded that from a technical standpoint, if the server is able to handle the client migrating to its server preferred address, clearly the server is able to distinguish those incoming connections, and therefore the technical issues probably don't apply for the server preferred address case of disabling active migration. So we made the decision, we had a consensus call to scope disable active migration only to the handshake address. And after you migrate to the preferred address, you're fine. So that leaves us with that contract issues bucket. And so now we have an issue raised as part of last call that by scoping it only to the handshake address, you have this class of servers that is technically capable of responding to that connection, but for contract or other reasons doesn't want to let you migrate to another network. So we really just have to decide on this issue, the scope of active migration. So next slide. In draft 28, the option applies to the connection. In draft 29, it applies to the handshake address. We have a PR to make it describe for each particular endpoint of the server. There are different ways you could communicate that. The PR sticks it in the SPA transport parameter. Other ways you could conceive of writing that, like non-zero or one values of the disable active migration, or we could do any of these as an extension. The other option that is also on the table, last slide, I believe, if the server just ignores the client's probes, then the probe will fail and the client will not migrate. If the client has actually lost that primary connection, then the connection will just time out. So I think our paths forward that are both reasonable are we pursue something like the PR that gets us the behavior we actually want, or the behavior that applies for this other scenario for disable active migration. Or we say we have consensus on the handshake only, and it's the server's job to ignore those incoming probes. I think both of those are reasonable resolutions. We just need to get a decision from the working group.
Thanks, Mike. So let's have a discussion. You were going to run the queue, right?
All right. So my preference is for the first one, that we actually do something technical to indicate it. And the reason is that we did have a reason for actually putting this parameter there in the first place. And for the case of those servers that Mike identified as the third kind, the contract kind, it's the same case for them as for any server that uses disable active migration to begin with. So if we thought that it's not okay to rely on timeout, in some case, it's not okay to rely on timeout in this case as well. So I'm definitely for doing something. And it looks like on the PR that like nobody is opposed philosophically to solving the problem. It just needs to be a nice, simple, clean solution.
Okay, thank you. Next is Eric.
Yeah, so I think we have, when we previously discussed this, we said that this was something that people might want to put in an extension, and that's fine. I don't have a huge, just as a personal opinion, I don't have a huge resistance to kind of closing the rest of the gap and putting it in SPA, which is the PR that Mike has. And I think we've worked out most of the kinks in getting that appropriately scoped to different addresses, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's a fine thing to do. And if that would make enough people happy, then sure. We previously had a very similar discussion and all come to the consensus that it was better as an extension. I don't know if it's exactly the same as the other cases where it was claimed that there would be active harm if people had packets coming in from other addresses. In this case, especially if it's a policy thing and you just say, hey, I don't want this to do it, that's very similar to something that all devices or clients that are attempting to migrate are going to have to deal with anyway, which is that the answer you got back for this IP address is only applicable to one interface. And when you probe over the other one, you get nothing. That's always going to be something that people have to deal with. And so I don't think there's any problem in simply just not accepting packets from other sources that are outside of your contractual domain, which is nice in the sense that if you have address changes within that contractual domain, if you're, say you're an embedded cache within an ISP somewhere, if they need to switch local addresses on that ISP, or if something happens and the routing changes so hugely such that the IP changes as well as the port, that will continue to work fine in a way that if you say no to active migration, you might mistakenly think that you shouldn't be receiving those packets and freak out. So I think we could go either way. Previously, we went the other way. If we decide we want to go this way to fill what is perceived as a gap, that seems fine. But it's not quite as straightforward as just, oh, yes, this is needed and it matches the previous.
Thank you. Next is Kazuho.
Can you hear me? Great. So I think I tend to agree with what Eric just said. While there's no technical need to make a change here, I still think that it makes some sense to have the same feature set for the original address and also for the server preferred address. So the only concern regarding the current state of the pull request is that it requires or recommends the endpoint, the client, to use the same source address as it used for the handshake address. And I'm a bit concerned about that new requirement because it changes the assumption on how the client can be implemented. Previously, we could allow a client could be implemented simply by letting the operating system to choose the source address. Whereas if we have a specification that recommends a client to use a specific address, then the requirement on the API surface changes significantly. So I'm concerned about that change. But other than that, I think having the bit in the transport parameter or having a flag in the transport parameter is fine.
Yeah, thank you. Next is David Scanaji.
Morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think that at this point, if I understand this issue correctly, this is a minor change, and this happens enough like during and after the handshake that it can totally be negotiated with an extension. So I just wanted to say that I would really prefer this to be moved to an extension and us to like focus on the base protocol and what changes like absolutely need to be done at this point. That's it.
Thank you. Next is Christian.
Am I speaking? Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
Cool. Yeah, I am worried about the testing issues there because the more options we open, the more testing cases we get in the protocol and the more bugs we can have. I am also worried about requirements like a fixed client address, because in practice, if you change the destination address, there might be a CGA NAT in the way, and your source address may very well change. So I'm kind of uneasy about doing these kind of changes now after the working group last call, and I would really support having that as an extension and living with what we have in draft 29.
Thank you. Next is Mike again.
Yeah, so the two comments I wanted to make. First off, as to the keeping the same source address, that is intended to discourage clients from migrating to a different network attachment at the same time that they're doing the SPA. We can wordsmith around that. It's not intended to require you to keep exactly the same address and port on your same network. We can figure out the wording there. The other piece about what we previously agreed, what we had said was we weren't aware of any concrete scenarios that required this, and if we discovered some later, we could add an exception. Now we have them. The question is just how much later are we?
Thank you. Next is Igor.
Actually, Kazuha's proposal, basically, or his the concern and the same thing that Christian actually voiced, that it could complicate a bit some implementations to require exactly the same source address, and so I think that's perfectly reasonable not to include the capital should in the text, and it's even okay to let the OS choose the address, as long as basically it's not change, you don't deliberately change and migrate later, because for all practical purposes, you're much more likely to be migrating soon after the handshake, and that's likely to be, you'll be sticking with the same network attachment you had during the handshake. So yeah, it's a very pragmatic and much more friendly to implementation approach to just say migrate once and don't migrate again.
Thank you, Igor. And we have Ian. Ian, are you with us? No, you left. Okay. But Jana is here. Jana.
Now?
Oh, Ian, sorry.
Okay, sorry.
Hold on just a minute, Jana.
During this conversation, I kind of discovered two things about this particular kind of feature that I did not anticipate. One is it does provide a little bit, if a server really wants to not wait for a timeout and doesn't have this feature, they are slightly more incentivized to want to mint a stateless reset oracle. I mean, the text obviously says you must not do that, but like, I mean, as a server vendor, like you're choosing between like potentially having a client timeout, which is a pretty painful experience, and like minting an oracle that you may or may not, in certain circumstances, like have a strong disincentive to like do. So that was one kind of observation, that because that was my first response to this, is like, why don't you just stateless reset it and move on? And the answer is no, you must not do that. The other is it provides a slight incentive to not give out any connection IDs, which is actually, I think, the easiest solution as a server vendor to this problem, is you just don't give out any more connection IDs. And then the rest of the text basically says like the client must not intentionally migrate after moving to the SPA if you don't give out any connection IDs. And this like solves itself. I don't know if we'd like the fact that it solves itself in that way, but like that's the easy solution to this problem from like my deployment perspective. So that's why I feel like I don't have a strong opinion, and from a deployment perspective, this is okay.
Thank you. Go ahead, John. Oh, wait, hold on. Let's try and give you audio. Try now.
Do I have audio now? I seem
great.
what Eric said is actually quite relevant, but in at a high level, I just want to bring it back to I feel like we are rehashing the discussion that's happened on the issue, and we keep going around in the same circles because fundamentally we think this problem is basically solvable in the way that it's proposed in Mike's PR. But we are really talking here about how much do we want to take on right now at this late stage in the game. Now, given that the fix is in the PR, more or less, it's basically there. But we, as Mike said, we may have to wordsmith a little bit, but we are basically there. At a high level, there is a fundamental alignment in design here. The whole idea of migration should be attached to addresses, not to endpoints. And we had earlier the current text in the draft basically attaches it to the endpoint. With the change that Mike has proposed in his PR, I think this makes it per address. It makes it, we have the connection level 1 for the original address, and the SPA has its own disable migration bit. That aligns it, I think, with addresses, which is where I think it should be. And as you're hearing from implementers as well, there's some trepidation, perhaps hesitation, but there's not a real strong pushback against this. Because again, we are going back in the same circles as we have on the issue we did previously. We just did a consensus call. We're going back again. My suggestion would be at this point, because this issue keeps popping up, we can take this solution. We can go ahead with this. Not a lot of people have implemented SPA or have tested SPA yet. So it seems like it's one small piece that can actually move along. I can see Eric jumping into the queue there to say, yes, we have implemented and tested this. But I'm going to say that that's my opinion, that we should probably take this in and move forward instead of rehashing this again and again.
Next up is Christian, and I think we're going to cut the queue pretty soon.
I have implemented these things. I have implemented both draft 28 and draft 29. I have tested it. I know that several implementations have tested it too. And on the client side, the real problem is that we have two transport parameters that are possibly contradicting. There is one that says migrate or not, and as in don't migrate. And the other one that says, please migrate to this server address. And so the two of them creates a contradiction, because what does it mean to say, hey, don't migrate, but migrate to this client address, to this server address? And right now we say, okay, what that really means is that if you have a don't migrate and a transport address, it means please only migrate to this transport address, and then you can migrate to anything you want. And I think that's the ambiguity in the spec that Mike is working around. That's really what it is, because we have two contradicting TPs. And it's 4 a.m. here, sorry.
My sympathies. Thank you, Christian. Next, we have Eric.
Yeah, I actually would agree strongly with what Christian said. This is, we scoped this to just the initial address as a way of kind of wriggling around the fundamental distinction there. I think if you took the PR and you made it such that we specified it per address, not per endpoint, like Jana brought up on the issue and again just now, which is a fundamentally good thing that we probably should do either way. If you scoped it to just that and said, hey, we recognize that you've said, please go migrate over here, and that's going to come with potentially an interface change if that's required by, the fact that you have a VPN that claims the address that I gave you and asked you to do, and if you do that, then don't. I think if you scope it down to that and just say, hey, we covered this one thing, there's 2 other places where you need a similar switch and we didn't yet provide it, and we can always provide additional switches in a extension if we really decide we don't have the stomach for it, but it is essentially filling a gap that has caused a lot of confusion. if we filled that gap by simply saying, once you get there, now you can't migrate anymore. That seems eminently reasonable, and I suspect we could all be happy in that direction.
John?
Just clarifying what Eric said, I think Eric is suggesting that we allow for potentially one migration per additional address. In this case, limiting it to one because there is an additional address in the SPA. That's what I'm hearing. I want to confirm that's what Eric was proposing, that if you move to the SPA, you might have a change of source address, but after that, we don't allow for any more migrations. If that's the, yeah, that maybe that's necessary, but I'm just confirming that's what you're saying, Eric.
Eric?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Is basically we've got this fundamental opposition. If you said, hey, please move, but also please don't move anywhere. And so if you say, please don't move anywhere, we've said that scopes to only the one that you started on. You are going to have to move. That may come with address changes. I think we avoid touching all of that. If you want to restrict that farther, make it an extension, go crazy with lots of logic there. But effectively take that thing that currently only applies to one of 2 or 3 places that it should, and give the granular control over where it actually applies. So you get one move, you move, and you're done.
May I respond to this?
Of course.
Yeah. So Eric, so in the worst case, what happens in case you don't allow for this if you don't specifically allow for this migration is the same thing that would happen now, right? That the packets come to the server and the server may or may not deal with it. If it comes from a different source address, it may or may not get a get to the server. It may or may not get to the server infrastructure. So I guess in that case, the worst case would be that you wouldn't be able to reach the server if you had an address change and the server didn't support migration.
Last thought there, yes. Although you could argue that from a policy perspective, none of what we're talking about right now is needed, because you could always just not accept the packets on the, if you're contractually obligated that packets coming from outside your ISP aren't allowed in, then don't allow them in. But,
of course, but just narrows it down a little bit more.
Yeah, so people have asked for an explicit way to express that. This gives you an explicit way to express that, and only that.
Yep. Okay, thanks.
Is this you telling me to go next?
Yes.
No worries. So I've been following the discussion here, and I want to apologize if I misunderstood anything, because it is stupid early right here, and my coffee hasn't kicked in yet. But this conversation sounds like a brainstorm to me. It sounds like people in front of a whiteboard trying to figure something out. And that's fine, but this is no longer the time to be doing this. Like, we have a feature, we have some ideas. We don't have production deployments of this yet. So I would say take all of the, like, what's going to happen if we take this PR? We're then going to have another one because someone's going to come up with another scenario, and another one and another one. I would say, I would personally recommend that we stop and say, like, take all this good engineering effort, but let's take it to a separate extension that we can then bring back to the working group when it's more ready and we've seen some results. Because right now it just feels like we're designing the protocol at the phone, and it feels really late in the process to be doing that.
Okay, thank you, David. And to that end, I noticed we're 34 minutes into the meeting so far, and I think we have an hour and 40 minutes. So we don't have anybody else in the queue, which is great. Lars, how do you feel about doing a quick hum? Do you think that's helpful? And try? I know how you feel about the tool.
Yeah, so I hate the tool, but we can try if you think there is a benefit.
Right. I'm going to type some options into Slack, into Jabber, which will get mirrored to Slack. And we'll have 2 questions or 2 things we'll hum on. One is we need to address this before shipping. if my typing, and I apologize for my typing noises. Sorry, folks. And option 2 or hum 2 is going to be it's okay to leave this as is and consider an extension after shipping. Those sound like good hums? Any discussion on the hums? I don't see anyone in queue. Okay. Thank you for repeating those, Martin. So I will now start the hum for the first question, which is hum if you believe we need to address this before shipping. And this is done in the little graphy looking blue tab next to the red circly tab and the dark blue peoply tab at the top left of the screen in MeetEcho. Are we ready? Starting now. Oh, my role does not allow me to hum. Oh, right, my role doesn't allow me to hum. Okay, fair enough. I'll just sit here then. So again, the hum that we're currently humming for is we need to address this before shipping. Please go and click something now. Four, three, two, one, and done. Piano. So a medium hum. We need to address this before shipping. And so thank you, Jonna. The next hum we'll do is it's okay to leave this as is and consider an extension after shipping. Starting now, please go ahead and hum. Again, hum if you believe it's okay to leave this as is and consider an extension after shipping. If someone wants to sing, feel free.
Well, these pauses would be great to like show some commercials to make some money for the LLC. We should extend them to 3 minutes.
At least make it a standard time, you're saying? That makes sense. 2, 1. Fortissimo, loudest. Okay. So certainly there was more support for just calling this an extension. If some of the folks who felt that we need to address this before we ship something, if they could get on the queue and explain why, that would be helpful without going back into the details, please. Anyone? Go ahead, Igor.
Felt like I had to say something because I opened the issue, right? Well, it seems that conceptually we are leaving a hole. We know that there is a hole, that it's not hard to fill. And it's basically like, again, looking at the design, we did introduce this parameter for some reason for the pre-SPA migration case. It looks like there is a case of, and it's not a niche case, it's a very common actually situation on the internet that would in exactly the same way benefit from this treatment as the regional handshake address, so SPA or not, and we're just leaving it as a whole. And people commented that our current design seems incomplete because it should be attaching the semantics to addresses and not leave it in the current state. So just as a way of delivering a coherent version 1 of the protocol, especially since it doesn't take that much effort, it seems, would have been a better alternative. I mean, everything can be fixed later, and we can always deliver something slightly half-baked, and then we know there is a problem. So that's why I would come to get it over with now and be done with it, and don't create, like Ian said, incentives for people to do the wrong thing.
Igor, would you strongly object if we close this without making a change?
I don't know. I mean, I would be disappointed, but I mean, obviously everything can be worked through, and yes, you could always work through by just not giving out connection IDs, which I actually even stated in the issue is one alternative to solve it. And then the working group said that actually we don't want people to do that. We do want people to give out connection IDs for privacy reasons. So it would be disappointing. I mean, strongly object. I'm not sure what it means in this case. I mean, things are not going to get absolutely horrendously broken without it.
Normally, you know, one of the things we could say at this point would be, well, let's split up a design team, or let some people go off and come up with a proposal, and then come back later in the process. Part of the problem is that, as a couple of people were saying, we're at a point in the process where we're very close to the end, and so we don't have a lot of time unless we want to push the schedule out, which we can certainly do. But I think we need to get agreement in the group that it's important enough to do that.
Right, absolutely. I mean, there is a design already. I mean, there is a proposal already on the table. It's not like we need it. So there is Mike's PR, and it looks like there is a proposal that nobody objected to technically that we did in this, like right now, about don't have a master shoot with a capital about the same address. Just don't migrate later. So I'm not sure what new design group is needed. It's mostly like change the text now to exactly that, or don't touch it. So it's not like there is another alternative.
Okay.
It seems.
Great. Thanks, Igor. I'm not sure how much more information we can get from discussion, so I'm going to cut the queue, with the only exception being if someone's mind has been changed since they hummed, please get in the queue now. Thanks, Igor. Go ahead, Jana.
Thanks. I just wanted to say, respond to Igor to say that this is, I think to some extent what we are going through here is not that there is a strong technical disagreement, but there's no appetite for taking on something that requires people to think through, and people are finding hesitation, and people are finding that there's potential issues here. It's not clear, and that a lack of clarity is a good reason to not go ahead with something at this late stage, especially because we can find other ways around this. At a high level, I would just simply like to say that, as I'll repeat what David Skenazy pointed out earlier, we are at a stage in the game where we want to experiment with these things. We're going to learn things. We're going to have gaps going forward. We learn that, but we learn that through deployment. Even if some of us can see some gaps very clearly right now, and not everybody agrees, there are gaps. There will be, and it might be. Just we have to accept, I think, that we'll have to live with some gaps until we are able to get some more deployment experience.
Okay.
So
go ahead, Mark.
Go first.
So folks saw what I wrote down in the box, that basically the feeling in the room, the little virtual hum seems to have been that we're going to close this with no action. So I'm going to record that and mark a proposal ready. And we're going to run a consensus call that will have that issue with the resolution in it, and people can then object or not. But I think I agree with Mark that for this meeting, I think we've exhausted the discussion on this. Thanks, guys. And the editors have informed me that this was actually the last issue that they had that they wanted to discuss here. There's obviously more issues if you look at our project board that are still sort of floating around. So we have a bunch in triage, as you can tell. We have a whole lot of editorial stuff. We have some design issues that still require work, and then we have some that have consensus emerging that we're going to do the call on very soon. While I have this up, I will point out that we seem to see an increased rate of new issues being created, which is not what we need at this point of the process. So people will really, really need to think hard whether something is justified to be opened at this time. And you know, and if that doesn't help, we might, you know, need to have some very late stage process where maybe we want to, you know, have some more formal limit to this. But if we want to ship soon, we should really you know, stop mucking with the protocol and ship it. And the caveat is always that you don't want to have bugs in the protocol. We don't want to have problems, but it's getting awfully late to have this discussions on sometimes pretty fundamental aspects of the protocol. Does anybody, so since the editors don't want to talk about any other issues, is there anybody else who wants to talk about anything related to the base drafts?
Martin had his hand up, so let's let him talk first.
Okay.
I was just going to relay something that was put in Java by Echo. He suggested that we talk briefly about 3965. I would like to talk briefly about it and say that we shouldn't be doing that. And I don't think there's any action on our part to do there. But if people want to fight for that, then let's have that.
Okay, I'm gonna let Echo into the queue as well, because I assume he wants to talk about this too.
Yeah, I was going to say this issue ignores all of the design that's gone into the actual protocol. I don't understand why this is a problem that can't be solved in the future.
Thanks. I also do not want to be perceived as advocating for this issue. I advocate for closing this issue with no action, but I thought that this would be a good time to do that. And so I figured that maybe we could use that high bandwidth time to discuss it and close it with no action.
Do we have Nick here?
Yes, we do.
Great.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm fine after the discussion we have on here with either closing with no issue or some editorial warning text not to do things that back you into a corner.
So if we flip this to editorial, then our convention is that the editors close it at their pleasure. They'll add some text and talk to you about it, or they can decide that they don't need to add text. So are you happy with that?
Yes, I'm fine.
Okay, so we'll flip this to editorial then. Thank you. Jono.
Mind proposing PR?
Right now, all we're doing is proposing that we flip this issue to editorial, and then Nick can talk to the editors and see if they can come to some accommodation about some editorial text.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other issues that we need to discuss now?
Okay. Let me flick back to the agenda. One thing that we actually missed, like we sometimes do, is the hackathon interrupt report. I don't really know how the hackathon went because I'm in the European time zone, and most of the interrupt last week seems to have happened during American time zones. But the interrupt matrix, if I can pull it up, looks pretty full, which is good. There's some load. What the hell? Why is there a form responses? Anyway, and that looks, yeah. So it looks pretty green. There's some columns and there's a bunch of white, but that is mostly because we have some new stacks that haven't participated or are only server or client. But it's looking generally pretty okay. But my one observation would be that ECN does not seem to be very widely supported, which is a pity, especially just reporting the marks that you see on packets without actually doing anything with them is a pretty easy addition. And if people aren't implementing it, I might send pull requests to folks. This is also if somebody has interns or students available, right? If for the larger stacks, like Google, Facebook, Microsoft, what have you, if people want to send them PRs that implement at least reporting ECN, I think that would be valuable contribution, since the hope is that ECN will actually increase quality of experience over QUIC further than what you can do with TCP, because it might reduce losses. Otherwise, I don't really, I mean, we're going to continue doing this. I'm pretty sure we're going to have another interrupt event when the next drafts drop. But this sheet actually is still pretty interesting, but what's become more and more interesting in recent months is the automated testing that Martin Seaman and then Jana and others have worked on, which sort of automates this based on Docker images, and it basically looks like this. So there's a lot of the same tests that are manually done that are automated, and there's also some other tests that aren't part of the Google Sheet, like whether you support Cha-Cha-20. So participation in the interop is great. Evenly great is to create a Docker image for your server and client, and the necessary plumbing to hook it up into this runner, which is actually pretty simple. If you need help with that, I'm sure that Martin and others who've done it are willing to help you. And if you do it once and automate the build, you're always participating in this, and every day you get new results running against everybody else. So that's pretty great. So those two things I would highly recommend. And that's pretty much it in terms of the interop status. Are there any questions about that? And while we wait for that, I will pull up the quick load balancer slide deck, and Martin Duke can get ready. All right, there's no questions. You can DQ Martin, and I will try and show.
Hello, Martin.
In a better way.
Good day, everybody. So QuickOB has been plugging along in the background. I think it's like a lot of drafts where most people think it's kind of an important thing to do, but very few people care much about the implementation details. Next slide. We've had some actually fairly significant changes over the past couple of months. Thanks, Christian, for your PR. You can see what that says there. I'm not going to read the slide to you. Next slide. So here's kind of the status of getting feedback on this draft. Martin Thompson and Christian have actually been providing a lot of good input. Thank you for that, gentlemen. I've made an attempt to outreach to cloud providers that are actually running these layer 4 load balancers that we need to interact with. We haven't been super successful. The one person we've had really quality contact with has been reluctant to think this is even a problem, and then has grudgingly said that maybe they'll do the plain text algorithm, which is not a great response. I'm considering taking this to the ops area for early review. And right now there are 3 open issues. I think we've addressed everything that I was able to sort of judge technically quite quickly, that we just closed them rather quickly. There are 3 open issues still on the GitHub, and they all involve sort of trade-offs and value judgments, and that's what I want to spend today talking about. Next slide. Okay, so one is whether or not we should have more configuration bits. So just very briefly, in the first byte of one of these connection IDs, we have 2 bits just so people can rotate keys incrementally over a server pool. So the reason there are 2 bits is kind of, there are other code points happening for other things, but essentially, you have configuration 0, configuration 1 with different keys, and servers are some of your servers are on one, some are on the other, and so the load balancer can easily distinguish which configuration to use while that rollout happens. Now there's a proposal to make it 3 bits, and next slide. And it's to solve this problem that we've added to the security configuration. So you can imagine you've Mega Cloud Corp that has lots and lots of customers, and they say, boy, this QuickLB thing, we really believe in privacy and want to use block CIE encryption and all that stuff, but boy, it's a real pain to like manage all these configs and get them out to all servers. We just have one giant config for our whole company, and we'll email the keys or something to our customers, or securely email the keys to the customers. Well, obviously there's a problem here that an attacker simply becomes a customer of Mega Cloud Corp, gets the config, and now they can read the server mappings of all the CID. So that's obviously a bad thing. So so one thing is we add in security considerations, just so like the basic principle that you should try to use is the config as locally as possible. That different physical load balancers should probably have different configs, especially if they're serving different customers. If you can separate the config by things like IP address and so on, that's great. This eventually reduces, so it's like kind of the hard version of this problem is you have two mistrustful customers on a single load balancer. They have the same IP address and they're switched on SNI or something like that, which is of course not available on non-handshake packets. And so you have a few options here. So next slide. So one thing you can do is just kind of accept that in this irreducible point, there's just a sort of a total leakage of the server mapping, that these two mistrustful customers can simply read each other's server IDs because they have the same config. The other option is to just create more code points in the configuration bits so that you can have a long-lived instance of two different groups of servers with completely different configs, and the single load balancer can distinguish them. So we have sort of a trade-off between. So the problem with that is that then everyone on the path can see what the configuration bits are, can identify if that connection is destined for customer A or customer B. So we have a choice between a global leak of a small amount of information or a local leak of all the server mapping information. That is, whatever customer has to be co-located on that IP address can see all the server mappings, or everyone on the path has this has the ability at least to distinguish what the destination customer is. Next slide. So I have a couple more issues to discuss, but I'd like to stop now for any clarifying questions or any just sort of suggestions on how to proceed with this. Sure.
So as I understand it, the second issue is only an issue with ECH, right? Because if there's no ECH, then you just look at the SNI and you know who the customer is, right? I mean, it's not as good an attack because you can't mount it in the middle of the stream, but otherwise, true.
Well, right. So I mean, so if you're an attacker and you're observing the SNI, I mean, SNI is an example. I suppose there are other things you can switch on, but if you're already looking at the SNI, then I think it's a relatively minor compromise. But with ECH and other things coming down the pike, that could be more of an issue.
Sure. I'm just trying to think about.
Yeah.
Is there any way to solve this public cryptography?
I mean, that's a massive departure from the current design. If we were
No, sure. I'm not suggesting you do it. I'm just asking. Is it? I'm just trying to can we convince ourselves that it can't be done? And is this like here's what it can't be done, and then we just live with the trade-off, or
I would say that probably another way to do this would be trial decryption, where you hand different keys to the two customers, and the load balancer has to decrypt it twice, and has a rich enough server ID space that it can sort of have a low error rate.
Right, but the load balancers don't have memory to I mean, because let's say if you were to use public key, now I'm suggesting it, I guess. If we use public key, right, the load balancers could just cache the answer, right?
Cache the answer to what? So
I mean, you decrypt the connection ID once, and then you cache the data. Is that not a practical design?
I wouldn't say it's impractical, but we've certainly resisted keeping state up to now.
Okay. I'll try to do some thinking about this. Maybe this thing better. Oh, that didn't do it.
All right. Are there any other comments or questions about this? I really welcome some input on the list. Like I said, this is not really a technical judgment. This is a value judgment trade-off on different sorts of privacy exposures. Okay, moving on. Next slide.
Eat in the queue.
Oh, we do.
Okay. Yeah, I'm back. Sorry, I was going to comment on Ecker's comment about whether you could cache it, and I think the answer is yes, you can definitely cache it, but it mitigates one of the main advantages of using cryptography in this particular use case, which is you can have a load balancer that's truly stateless and only uses local crypto, which in some cases could actually be a lot faster than a hash table lookup of various sorts. And the other comment was going to be, I'm not really sure the third config rotation bit is buying you enough extra space to meaningfully mitigate the issues you laid out, but that's my intuition. Certainly it wouldn't for us, I don't think. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, we are a little bit limited in that the rest of that byte is reserved for CID. So we really only have CID linked to self-encoding. So we really only have 3 bits, unless, of course, we went and just opened up another octet for it, which would be a real shame. All right, well, hopefully we get some, I'm sure a lot of people are seeing this for the first time. Hopefully people can think about it and take it to the list. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the other issue. So unguessable connection IDs. So that's what quick transport says. It's it's not all that ambiguous. As many of you know, there are four algorithms in this draft. 2 of them involve some sort of encryption. One of them is not even really trying and just has a fixed set of bytes that encode the server ID in the clear. And the other one tries to obfuscate it for people who might be super reluctant to implement encryption for some reason. So this is obviously a bit of a problem, but next slide. Anytime we talk about these sort of privacy issues, I think we should always start with this, which is that there are real technical limits to what we can achieve with this algorithm. When there's one client attached to your server pool, they are linkable. Next slide. And when you have infinity clients, really almost any moderately sensible scheme will make you unlinkable. Next slide. Okay, so one part of this question is, what do we want to do with these non-encrypted connection ID encodings or server mapping encodings? As I said, the one I've engaged with 2 cloud providers so far. One, it's still been pretty surface level interaction. The second one has been super reluctant to really doing anything complicated here. So there's a the willingness to deploy question on the more sophisticated algorithms, at least on the load balancer side. Although I guess I represent a load balancer vendor, and we'll do the advanced stuff. One possible way out of this is to give the client more information. There's a basic incentive mismatch here. Is that the server is choosing what they're doing with the encoding, but it's the client that bears the consequences of that decision. So maybe instead of trying to overprescribe what servers do, just give the client more information. Tell them, hey, this is what I'm doing, and the client can decide whether or not they want to migrate, or the user agent more precisely. We could use disable active migration for that, which would mean that the whole point of QuickLB is to kind of allow multiple CIDs, so really only save you in that rebinding case, which is a pretty narrow case. Another option is to add a transport parameter that was a little more explicit. I mean, I don't want to byte shed over the design that transport parameter. We could add one that says, look, something like this is the algorithm you're using. You can go look up in the draft what the security properties of that are and decide if you want to migrate or not. So like I said, it could be 2 bits or whatever. But yeah. So next slide. So these issues are kind of related. Do we want to retain these unencrypted methods? And if so, what kind of safeguards should we put around them regarding notification to client? I'd like to open the floor for comments and questions.
Let's try and brief.
Anybody want to queue to discuss this? There was a fair amount of discussion in Jabber. Eric.
I'll make one quick comment, which is just that rather than being offered a set of, oh, here's the things that I'm doing, you can choose what behavior you'd like, it'd be nice if we could try to remove some of the behaviors that you might not like and make it such that, you know, rather than saying here's a potential compromise you could make, we could say the only options that we allow are ones that aren't huge compromises. But then again, I suspect that isn't a new thought, and so there's likely a reason why some of those compromises exist. So, but I would have a preference towards not forcing people to choose between functionality and something like linkability or their privacy, because we've seen that a lot of the times it's both possible to have both, and if you present a choice between those two things, not everybody is going to make the same decision, and sometimes that's going to compromise people in either of those areas.
Thank you. Yeah, I should also say that I personally don't have any strong opinions about this issue one way or the other. Another reason I'm really interested in getting input from the community. So thanks, Eric. What I'm seeing in the Jabber is a lot of resistance to the obfuscated algorithm, and actually not a lot of some comfort with the idea of plain text. A related issue here that Kazuo is bringing up is that there's a little disagreement on whether, so one possible threat model is that an attacker chooses to direct a lot of traffic to a specific server when they have the server mapping ID exposed, server ID mapping exposed, and there's some disagreement whether that's a problem or not. And if you want to take down one of my 100 servers, like, you know, go knock yourself out. So that's always an interesting discussion. But okay, I'm hearing. Does anyone want to speak up for the obfuscated CID algorithm?
I guess not.
Sound like it.
Okay. All right, I'm going to take that to the list, but I'm hearing now. I'm hearing very little excitement about obfuscated, which is great because that was horrible code to write. Oh, by the way, so I've actually open sourced some code. There's a link to it in the QUIC-LB channel on Slack if you want to poke at it and see what's involved there. All right, if there are no other questions, then thank you for your time.
Cool.
Thanks,
Thank you very much, Brian.
Brian or me, I guess Brian is presenting, is next. Brian, have you found somebody to take over minuting for you?
Yes, I have.
Okay, great.
I am clear to begin the threats.
Great. We have just a little over 30 minutes left, so let's.
This will be.
Right. Go ahead.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Brian. For those of you who don't know me, here are two drafts that have been actually around for quite some time. The applicability and manageability drafts, the ops drafts, have not seen a whole lot of traffic until just recently because we were sort of waiting for the core drafts, the base drafts to be done. The base drafts are now, as you can see from the fact that we had no discussion on any issues whatsoever, the base drafts are done. So let's turn our attention to the ops drafts. Next slide, please. Next. Yeah. So we just published a revision 07. There are a couple of sort of content changes here. We've got more discussion about using ALPN pointers in the HTTP draft on that. In the manageability draft, we did a pass to make sure we were aligned with the transport and invariance drafts because there had been some changes to the wire image since the last time we did that pass. That is now done. And added a section on UDP policing. Next slide. We have a few remaining open issues. There are 3 of these in applicability that have proposed PRs. We've got reviews done. The questions that we'd like to ask in the 5 minutes of discussion that we have here are, does anyone have a objection to merging these? Or do we need more text? So each of these issues is linked together with the PR that fixes it. You can also go and look at the GitHub QUIC-WG ops drafts /issues to have a look at these. Next. We've got one remaining open issue on manageability, which is to better understand how SNI. Good.
Has a question.
Yes.
Go ahead, Martin.
Yeah, so I just wanted to highlight the point that we're creating interdependencies between drafts by citing the load balancers draft.
Mm-hmm.
I'm comfortable with that, but I wanted to make sure that everyone else was doing so, because it seems to me like these drafts are now much closer to being ready, and I'm not sure that load balancer draft is.
So if I'm not completely forgetting this particular reference, this is a informative reference. Or wait, is it a normative reference?
I think it's just
as opposed to question mark
informative.
Yeah. The intention is that it's informative, because we did actually think about this with exactly this particular issue in mind. Do we want to block publication on this on the publication of the load balancer draft? And the intention is not to block publication of this draft on load balancers. So
we'll probably need to make that clear when we get this one out the door, so that it doesn't hang around in a queue waiting for a reference, because that does happen.
Right. My understanding is that the current process is, if we make it an informative reference, they'll just leave it as an informative reference to the ID. They won't hold for the RFC, correct? Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So the intention is this is informative. If that is currently in the draft as a normative reference, that's a bug, and we should fix it in the PR.
Go ahead, Mirja.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's normative or informative reference, but the question here, or the second question here was if this PR is okay then, or we actually want to add more text to kind of summarize what's in the load balancer draft and to make sure we don't have this dependency.
All right, I hear silence. Let's keep going.
That silence was me actually checking, and in the PR, it is actually an informative reference. So next, on to manageability. We have one open issue here without a proposed PR. There is some kind of hand-wavy text in the draft that's been there for about a year that says, and you can get the SNI information out of the quick handshake. And we don't really talk about how there is an issue to clarify that and make it a little bit more clear. We now have, after essentially trying to find people to write this text, we now have Marcus Elar signed up to do this, so he will put together a PR at some point soon. Next. Go ahead, Eric.
Not to say that SNI is necessarily available, because that is a situation that may not obtain in the relatively near future.
Right. So the question is, do we want to, like the wider question is, do we want to document the wire image as of the time of publication of the base drafts? I mean, I think we could just put a one line of text into here that says, you know, by the way, SNI is here now, but reference to why that may be going away soon. I think that's probably fine.
I think that'd be fine too.
It
seemed like some of the debate was about in the clear, in the fact that it was like, you know, we really kind of like badly obfuscated, and I just want to point out it might actually be encrypted.
Yep. Cool. Yeah, I'll take a note, or let's put in the notes to take a note to add that comment to issue 75 when it gets fixed. David.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Cool. I just wanted to say I've spent over the past few months a lot of time discussing SNI and QUIC with middle box vendors because there are a lot of equipment vendors that today parse SNI in TLS and wanted to ship the same feature for Quick. The problem is that this has been a huge headache for me for multiple reasons. So the first one is that all these equipment vendors have kind of ported their code to, from a TLS parser to a Quick parser, but they haven't actually thought through the implications. And for example, in TLS, once you've picked out the SNI, the 5 tuple will stay the same. And if the client wants to create another connection or something, it will create a separate TCP flow with a separate TLS handshake where you can again parse the SNI. In Quick, that's not true at all. In Quick, you can, even if you parse the SNI, RStack, for example, if we detect a black hole, we'll spuriously migrate our client port in order to check if maybe that 5 tuple is getting black holed by something along the path. And sometimes, with the IETF spec, you can also change your connection IDs mid-connection and all this. So that means that if you're relying on SNI, sure, you can extract the SNI from this client hello packet, but you can't tie it to the other packets. So what's the point of extracting the SNI if you can't actually act on it like it is? Right. And one further point that I think is really important to make is that because of these boxes were deployed without the Quick team at Google knowing, they deployed it with whatever the Google Quick client hello format was at the time. And that client hello format was the same from Google Quick version 1 to Google Quick version 43. But then we changed it in response to the IETF header format changes. And on some of these networks, we are forced, against my personal objections, but we are forced to stay on that old version. So this has effectively already ossified Quick. We're pushing very hard to change that, and we're making it clear to folks that once we ship IETF Quick, that'll be the version that they need to update to, and then we will stop supporting Google Quick because we don't want to support it forever. But I'm really, really, really concerned about having text that says, here is how you extract the SNI, because at that point, we've just ossified the Quick initial client hello format for all versions of Quick, pretty much. And I don't think that's what we ever wanted to do with Quick. So things to keep in mind, but if there's any text explaining how to do this, please have at least a paragraph explaining why this won't work, and it's okay, people won't read it and this will ossify anyway. So I think we're doomed no matter what, but I think we should at least discuss it in this draft.
Yeah. So I, in general, will share your sense of nihilism. Actually, what I hear from this, and I'm going to take advantage of the fact that it's 5:17 in the morning there. What I hear is that you're volunteering to do a pass on these documents and make sure that we are being appropriately non-recommendative, and that you'll also review the PR for this issue when it comes in. The intention here is to be, blunt and clear about what the wire image is and what it isn't. And I suspect that what Marcus comes up with will be will meet those requirements. But please do have a review of the PR that is associated with this image or with this issue when it comes out.
I can commit to that if someone adds me as a reviewer to the PR, because I might forget.
I will do that.
Thanks.
I'm assuming you're referring very heavily to the invariants, because that's
yes
the only guarantee we make about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was actually part of the change to make sure that we were updated to the last invariants, is pointing out that, by the way, invariants. We only talk about, what is shipping as of right now in this doc. So there's a few remaining issues. We want to resolve those. There's issues 85, 95, and 100, which are basically just notes to the editors to go and do a full editing pass to check normative language references and alignment with V1 before we send this out to working group last call. To some extent, this presentation was meant to, threaten you with an impending working group last call so that you would go and read the document, because I know that this has fallen off of people's radars for a while, and I would like to bring it back onto people's radars because we'd like to get this out the door by next meeting or even earlier. I guess we'll talk about whether we're doing an interim, a virtual interim before not Bangkok in a subsequent part of this meeting. But yeah, I think we're basically, as long as we get a few more eyeballs on this, we are basically done. So please, people of QUIC, lend us your eyes. If there are no other questions, I'll hand it over to the next. Cool, thanks a lot.
Right. Martin Thompson with the slide title that killed the data tracker. We're now entering the if time permits bucket. So we have 20 minutes left, so we can hopefully go to a bunch of these.
All right, you can go on to the next slide. That's the first byte of the QUIC packet, by the way. So we fixed a bit in the packet, and that makes me uncomfortable. It seems that there are certain cases where we might want to use that bit for something. And so the question here is, I ask myself, is what would it take to change the bit? So next, please. So all you really need to do is get permission from the person receiving the packet that the bit is safe to change. The only real reason that we use this bit in some cases is for those people who have Google QUIC. The bit is useful in distinguishing IETF QUIC from Google QUIC relatively cheaply. Everyone can look at David's document and how you might actually do that. And for those people who are deploying QUIC alongside the real-time protocols like Stun and RTP, it helps us distinguish QUIC from all of those other protocols. So that you really only have to look at the first octet, because people deploying those protocols are reliant on looking at the first octet to determine which protocol is in use. But for the vast majority of deployments, the value of that bit doesn't really matter. It's just another bit, and they don't really use it. So asking them for permission might be enough. So next. But just being able to set the bit doesn't really matter. It's not that useful to anyone if you can't use it for something. So the question is, what would it take to make the bit useful for some purpose in the future? So next, please. So one option is to use it without encryption. You can set it to any other value when you don't have any particular use for the values. And you can set the value based on some desired semantic. Maybe you set the bit to 0 every time you send something evil. And then once you know that the other side has indicated an intention to use a particular semantic, you can actually act on the value. The other option, next slide, is to try to put that bit under encryption. It means that you have to negotiate its use because of the way that we do our header protection, but which limits its use to short header packets. And we just extend the header protection over that bit once that's happened. Problem with this is that both endpoints need to agree to do this, because both the sender and the receiver need to agree on the change to the way that this bit is processed. Otherwise, they don't talk to each other with probability 50%, which is not great. If you'd like to add 50% packet loss, then that's one way you can do this. So next slide. So the draft defines the first use, the without encryption bit. In part, this is because I figure that we have a very large number of bits that are already under encryption, and it would be sort of churlish to deny those people who want to do things without encryption an extra bit. But at the same time, it's mostly because I was too lazy to work through all the implications of the other one, and this one seems like you can get more greasing out of it. There are already a few interoperable implementations of this one. I don't know why people latched onto this idea so enthusiastically, but there you have it. That's all I have.
Thanks, Martin. Echoes in the queue. Oh.
Maybe like questioning the initial conditions here a little bit. Do we still need this bit to distinguish from Google Quick?
That is something that I have deliberately left unstated at this point. I believe that Google still use this one, and they don't have to ship the server half of this extension. If they do, and if at some point they manage to wean themselves off the other stuff, then that will work too.
You're building a queue
about to get an
from a Googler. So go ahead.
Let's let David talk. Oh, sorry, David. 1 second.
At Google, we still support Google Quick version 43 and version 46. So version 43 has what was the format of the first IETF draft. And then we also support version 46, which had the second version of the invariants. And now everything after that uses the third version of the invariants because they don't vary. So once we deprecate 43 and 46, we'll be good to go because everything will be using the new invariants, so we won't need this. But until then, we still use that bit to figure out if a packet is like using the v43 encoding or later. But as MT said, like that's not a blocker. I still think this is a good idea. We wouldn't support it on a server until we deprecate that version, but yeah, definitely open to implementing it on the client.
Thank you. Echo, any other questions?
I don't. Well, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, can we remove the invariant? I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get at is like, do we need this bit need any special consideration at all?
So I need to point out this is not an invariant.
Right. Sorry, you're right.
Not an invariant. What we're trying to do here is protect the fact that it is version specific.
Right, but I guess where I'm going with this is that with the H3 case, as soon as Google changes, there'll be no reason not to let them randomize it all the time, and with and without encryption. And in the real-time case, like depending on exactly what's deployed, it will either be like a permanent thing you have to have, or it will also be randomizable. And so I'm just trying to figure out, like, this seems like sort of a funny half measure that doesn't map the conditions that we actually find this at.
Right. So your point with the real-time case is that you can negotiate this to be fixed on if you're multiplexing with something else. So you don't need to worry about negotiation.
Or it may turn out that no sane person ever wants to multiplex quick with RTP.
Right.
So I guess yeah. So I think my thesis is, like, if the G-QUIC need for this is going away, then I suggest that for H3 we actually like require it to be randomized all the time, or allowed to be randomized all the time.
You got Ian in the queue who might have an answer. Or
yeah. I hopped in before, but thanks for adding me now. It's a good time. I think that, I mean, the time frame for us getting rid of G-QUIC is as soon as possible, but we're still talking like more than a year. I mean, we haven't actually shipped an IETF quick RFC at this point. But that being said, you probably could shift the default posture from the current posture of never randomize to always randomize and have a way to turn it off. But that would be a fairly major change to the core design at this point. But that would be functionally, I think, fine with us. But I think you would have to be in the core draft if you're going to do that, because I do think there's going to be enough people, not just G-QUIC, but also the multiplexing issue. I mean, that was raised as a fairly major issue early on. I would not want to revisit that and decide we're going to ditch multiplexing quick with other protocols completely.
ditching quick multi-other protocols completely. I'm just saying that we're only really trying to do H3. And so if we can solve the HTTP problem, we know how to solve the RTP problem. I mean, like what I'm saying is that the RTP problem is going to be a true invariant, right? Like whether we call it invariant or not. Like if you're multiplexing RTP, you're going to need to do this.
So I'd suggest that we maybe try and make some more progress on this than on the list. This is sort of the first presentation of this draft. And we have about 10 minutes, which lets us hopefully get through at least one more of the if time permits bucket. Next one is Martin Duke. Let me pull it up.
Hello again, everyone. TLDR on this one, we have a new little draft, and what I would really like to know is if people are interested in developing this and deploying it, and therefore it's worth continuing to refine. So what this is about is basically taking Martin C.
Can folks hear Martin still?
I just lost audio.
Yeah, you lost audio, Martin. And no, you've still got video. Martin, I'm going to kick you out of the queue and you rejoin. Let's see how that goes.
Try again.
You're very weak. Could it be that your microphone has changed, perhaps? You're still very weak.
So I would suggest if we can't fix this within the next 10 seconds, we go to the next presentation. Going once.
Try one more time, Martin.
No, it's not working. Let's move on. Next one is the ATSS document. I think Spencer was going to talk to that one. And I'll try and pull it up.
Spencer, you there?
Yeah, thank you. So this is just updating what's been happening since we submitted this draft. And next slide, please. So basically, this is the 3GPP access traffic steering, switching, and splitting service. And the point of this is that this is work that's in 3GPP that's moving to support more than TCP and Ethernet. So they're looking at using QUIC in release 17, and they asked to be informed through a formal liaison about our work QUIC, and we said yes. Next slide, please. We have gotten feedback on the QUIC mailing list so far. Thanks for this. We haven't had a lot of conversations responding there yet, and I think we're going to have more. But this is actually, we are getting feedback, and we are appreciating that, and that is having an impact on what 3GPP is doing with their plans for release 17. So thank you for all that. Next slide, please. So the June meeting, this is where the current study draft of 3GPP is. There are 4 proposed solutions that are accepted for further consideration: QUIC tunneling, multipath QUIC tunneling, QUIC proxy, and multipath QUIC proxy. Just making sure that people understand there are race conditions between 3GPP and IETF work on this with unreliable datagrams, with multipath QUIC, with support for IP traffic and mask. It's worth mentioning that there's a conference call on this immediately after the QUIC meeting ends. So that work is happening. But I just wanted to put this in front of the working group and call people's attention to it. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions? Jono.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So it's strange to, thank you for the presentation, Spencer, but it's strange that the race conditions between 3GPP and IETF suggests that 3GPP is doing work on this. Are they actually doing work on developing things here in QUIC to make it work?
No, absolutely not. The thing I didn't say on the second slide was that the participants on this draft want to do the work in the IETF, not in 3GPP, and the rest of the 3GPP participants audibly agree with that. That's basically it's the race conditions between 3GPP deadlines and IETF movement. But I mean, that's not new. What's new is that we are coupled a lot more closely than we have been on most things in 3GPP for a while. I can talk more about that, not on this call, but.
Okay. We've got 4 minutes left, so David Skanazi, if you can keep it relatively brief. Thank you, Jono. David?
You, I think, double-clicked and kicked me out. No worries. Very quickly, I've seen more and more discussion about this 3GPP MP-QUIC thing, and I just wanted to say, the impression I'm getting from a lot of folks is that, and a lot of engineering teams around the world are saying, yeah, 3GPP is doing MP-QUIC, and they have this deadline for this 3GPP standard that's happening. And every time I feel like I have to tell them, yeah, that's not going to happen. MP-QUIC will be defined at the IETF, which is not what it's not doing yet. So I just wanted to say that we should really clear up that confusion, because right now it's kind of a mess.
Thanks. Cutting the queue after Spencer, because we do want to try and get back to Martin, if only briefly. No, Spencer?
I understand the confusion, and like I say, I think that part of this is I want to say race condition again, perhaps misusing the term, the race condition between how quickly we're moving on multipath QUIC and how quickly people seem to need multipath QUIC. But which is fine. That just means we have something that matters a lot to the rest of the world. Thank you all.
Thanks, Spencer. Okay. Very briefly, I think we've got officially 2 minutes, maybe a couple more. Martin, if you want to go through as quickly as you can. That sound better? No, it's not. Okay. Sorry, Martin. Okay. All right. Lars, do you want to end up with planning then, since we've got now less than 2 minutes?
Yeah, with 2 minutes, I would do planning. So it's not clear whether the Bangkok will happen, physically or not. My money is on virtual, but also the question is, what do we do in between? We could certainly schedule a working group interim meeting at any time. A little bit of a challenge might be time zones, since we have people that are basically around the globe. So we haven't really done virtual interims because they might be cumbersome. But if so my feeling would be that we don't do that unless we hit a roadblock issue that really just needs actual discussion, so we can't resolve it in GitHub. I would prefer to work desynchronized and work on GitHub and try to push the issues there, which has been working pretty well for the last couple of months. So unless somebody really feels like we need an interim, my preference would be to just do a working group meeting at 109 and see what happens. Hopefully, I guess we will be able to do another working group last call on either -30, or if stuff is still pending, the version afterwards. I would, again, sort of really caution people to not raise new issues without a really strong reason. Also, if you want to help speed things along, you can like pick up an editorial issue where there's no PR and make one, right? I think the editors would be very happy to comment on PRs rather than doing them all themselves. So if you feel like you want to do that, please go ahead. I think the editors will like your help. And then, once we're sort of closer to being able to IETF call this thing, I think we should have a discussion with the ADs and also the broader community what we would do in terms of a recharter or slicing and dicing follow-on work between this working group and potentially others. At the moment, stuff like web transport and mask have been broken out, and that makes a lot of sense. But there's a bunch of extension work that's apparently on the horizon. If you look at what's being proposed that would need a home somewhere, there's certainly a lot of minor revisions to the base drafts that we might find as people implement it and deploy it more that needs a home, and there might be other things. So that's a discussion that I think we're going to have more around the Bangkok timeframe than before. And I see Mark nodding.
Yes. I think the only thing I'd add to all of that is that if we do have another working group last call, it probably isn't going to be as long as the last one we had. It'll be just a confirmation that the changes we made as a result of working group last call are well reflected in the drafts.
Yeah, I think we're going to probably have a longer IETF last call simply because we're dumping a whole bunch of longish documents on the community. So yeah, people will still have obviously the chance to read everything in detail then, but I don't think we're going to do another 4-week working group last call. Unless like 50% of the text changes, but at that point I'm stepping down. With that, we're 2 minutes over. Any final thoughts from everybody? Otherwise, we'll see you on the mailing list and on GitHub and in VTech again. Hey, Lucas is
Lucas.
Yeah,
there's Lucas.
Hello.
Hey, Lucas.
If you can hear me, the consensus call was due to close. The current consensus call is due to close before this meeting, but I had some local internet issues, so I'll be doing that afterwards. And we had pushback on one of the issues, which we'll recycle back in, but I'll make this all clear on the mailing list. So thank you everyone for the session today.
Cool. All right.